Good afternoon and welcome everyone to this session, Exam Advice from the Experts. Today we have four leading groups to talk to us about the FASEA exam, which is a fantastic opportunity to hear from those who are really close to the exam. Now, I think the timing of this is really precise. We've intended to do it just before the July exam, which starts next week. But also, we've got the benefit of having the results released yesterday by FASEA, giving us the results from the May exam. Now, today, we're going to have the webinar will be 1 hour of CPD. You'll get the CPD certificates next week. All participants in the webinar, other than the speakers, will be on mute. Now, we've got time reserved at the end of this webinar for a question session, but we ask that you put your questions through the Q&A button at the bottom in the middle rather than the chat section. Now, what I do want to do is set the scene to start with before we go to our first speaker. Quickly to give you an update on what the government announced on the 24th of June. Now, this was as part of the government's tabling in the House of Representatives, the single disciplinary bill, body bill. It's only been tabled, but in the content of the bill, there was a provision, and I just want to come back to this. What the government is doing is changing a lot of the professional standards law as part of putting the single disciplinary body in place. But one part of it is to give themselves the power through a regulation to provide an extension in limited circumstances for the completion of the exam through until September next year. Now, they have made it clear in that media release that it will be only for those people who have had at least 2 attempts at the exam. So that's something that you do need to take into account. And obviously for anyone who hasn't yet sat the exam and is not registered to sit the July exam, it will not be possible to have achieved those 2 attempts before the end of this year. So you do need to very much understand whether it might apply to you. Now, importantly, I just want to provide some level of reservation about this. The bill has not yet been debated or, for that matter, passed. So there is lingering levels of uncertainty. It also is designed to happen next year, which is after the point at which responsibility for the exam will be transferred from FASEA to ASIC. And obviously ASIC aren't yet running the exam and may not have themselves set up to do that immediately in 2022. There are no dates that have yet been set for the exam in 2022. Now, from the results that were announced by FASEA yesterday, it seems that something like 3,100 advisors have at one point in time been unsuccessful in the exam. That is a sizable number, and Amelia from FASEA will talk to that very shortly. But also there is something like 1,200 who seemingly have sat the exam once, but have not yet gone back to have a second attempt. For this particular group, what they do have in front of them is a good opportunity potentially to extend through into next year. Now, I will now pass over to our first speaker. Amelia Constantinides is the Standards Director at FASEA. She is responsible for all of the FASEA standards, but also for the management of the exam. So there could be no person better qualified at FASEA than Amelia to talk about the exam. So I'll pass over to Amelia. Over to you, Amelia. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Phil, and it's a real pleasure to be here this afternoon to talk to you a little bit about the exam, but more importantly to give you some tips in terms of what we're seeing across all of the exams based on our experience to date in running the exam since June 2019. So well and truly a fair bit of experience that we've got now. Phil, if you want to pass to the next slide. So to date, as of yesterday, and congratulations to all of those that were successful in yesterday's exam results. But as of the May exam, we've got over 14,850 advisors that are on the FAR that have already passed the exam. 8 out of 10 advisors typically pass first time, and that's just an overall stat. And overall, in terms of all of the advisors, whether they've, irrespective of how many sittings they've had, we do have an 89% pass rate. Now that is, 9 out of 10 advisors will pass the exam. It's really important to know that this is actually an extremely high stat for, professional or high stakes exams of the like. So it's a really good and great outcome. Unfortunately, though, there are 1,918 advisors that have been unsuccessful. But what I can say is that there are many advisors that have attempted the exam multiple times, and the data does tell us that the majority of those advisors have actually improved their results, and some of them improved them significantly to actually achieve a pass mark. But the fact is that they are actually learning, and their knowledge is being enhanced through this process, which was one of the sort of intents of the broader regulatory requirement. So over 65% of advisors pass at a resit. In terms of our resources, we do provide a number of resources, and I really encourage you to look at the resources FASEA provides as a starting point. As Phil indicated, we do develop the exam. I've been very involved in the exam from the very beginning in terms of the structure, the content, and also the resources that we provide. So the resources that we provide are very directly linked to the actual exam itself. Starting point is the exam preparation guide. You'll find all of the resources on the FASEA website on the preparation page, but really start with the preparation guide. It provides a detailed curriculum. All questions are linked to that curriculum. So you won't find a question that isn't linked to the detailed curriculum. The reading list is incorporated in that, and I'll talk a little bit more about that as well. Candidate video, for those that haven't sat the exam yet, and it is going to be your first time, have a look at the video. It gives you an insight in terms of the environment and what to expect on the day, which is also very useful. Practice questions, we've got over 100 practice questions. We added some more in last week as well. We do update it ahead of each cycle, each sitting, so please make sure you download the latest version or go into the latest version. They are available online and in a PDF form. We encourage you to use the online version. It's available free. You access it through your exam account, and then refer to the responses in the PDF to cross-check, how you've gone in terms of that. And the other key point is, from an overall perspective, every exam sitting, we actually assess what are the underperforming areas of the whole cohort, not just for those that have underperformed. It's about the whole cohort, whether they've passed or not. It provides key insights into the areas that are underperforming, and you'll see that there's a number of trends across every single exam that we'll see, and I'll go through some of those this morning. So I really encourage you to have a look at that. The reading list is linked to the curriculum. We encourage you not to feel overwhelmed when you look at the reading list, because there is a lot of material. But think about what is relevant to you. What are your gaps? And look at the areas under each of the main knowledge areas that you need to brush up on. So focus on that. You're not expected to memorize it all at all. It's really about how do you understand all of the areas that you're required to know in your day-to-day job that you're brushing up on. Think about how you create a study plan that is based off your reading list, or off the reading list, in terms of the gaps and what you need to know. And some of the overarching areas that are trends across all exams might guide you in terms of the areas that you might want to think about and study as well. Ahead of each exam sitting, we actually run webinars, and we will continue to do that for every sitting to the end of the year. We run pre and post webinars. Pre is to help you with how to prepare for the exam, what some of the key things you need to think about when you're working through the exam ahead of each sitting. In terms of post, so those that were unfortunate as part of the May exam, we will be running a post briefing to have a look at and help you understand, I guess, the feedback you've received, but also what are some of the questions and how, how the questions were troublesome for some of you and what you need to do to think about that for your next sitting. Each advisor that underperforms receives an exam result report. The areas that are highlighted, as you'll see on this feedback on this slide, are the areas that you as an individual underperformed. It's not the overall cohort, it's your results based on the questions that you answered and your responses. So it'll highlight the area. So if there's a couple of areas under each area, or if there's more in one than the other, think about how you use that in preparation for the next sitting and your resit. That will give you a greater guide. We don't give you the questions because every exam has different questions, and it's about the area that the question was actually assessing that you underperformed in. So that's critical to understand that. All right, that's all the resources. As I said, they are available on our website as links. So please go there as a first point of contact when you're preparing. Make sure you are downloading the latest versions because we do update before each sitting. So make sure you've got the latest versions before you actually start your study. I will now go into some insights and tips. So as I mentioned, we've been running the exam since June 2019. And what I'm highlighting here is not only the underperforming areas for the May exam, which was the most recent, but we are seeing these trends across all of the exams. So I'll highlight the areas and give you some tips around them. So I think the first two are very much related around key advice documentation, and it's under the financial advice, regulatory and legal obligation area. You might all think, well, I know exactly what I need to do in terms of advice documentation, and you probably all do, but it needs to be related to the scenario that's provided in the exam. But also really encourage you all to understand your legal obligations stated in the Corporations Act, rather than answering the questions based on what your licensee policies are asking you to do. There are differences in some licensees in terms of what's the requirement of the Corps Act versus what your licensee asks you to do. I'm not saying they're wrong, but they are differences, and we aren't assessing you on your licensee policy, we're assessing you on the legal requirements. So please make sure you understand that. Another area is, identifying breaches and, what do I do when we've got a breach in terms of reporting and so forth. It's not your licensee's job just to know what a breach is, when to report it, how to report it. As an advisor, it's your obligation to understand when you have breached, when you need to notify your licensee or who to notify and what they do with it. So it's important that you understand those obligations, because we have had a number of advisors saying, well, my licensee does that for me, I don't need to know about that. So it's really important that you understand that. Privacy requirements, it's a trend that comes and goes across different exams, but one that you need to be across, understanding how it applies to different clients, and especially your obligations with regard to what's private and sensitive information, how you store private information, and passing on other information to specialists or other professionals. What's your obligations around that? TASA, or the Tax Agent Services Act, is key. Who does it apply to? What activities are deemed tax advice? And what are the obligations of a tax financial advisor? In terms of applied ethics, professional reasoning and communication, obviously understanding the code, how it applies to different client scenarios, and really effectively applying that, not only the values, but the standards. Really encourage you to have a look at our recent guidance materials that we provided. It does include the intent of each of the standards, how you look at it from an overall perspective, but also how it applies to different scenarios. The other key area is judgments and biases. So not only understanding client biases, but also your own in terms of how you're making decisions. And there's key questions around that. And finally, complex situations and family situations around conflicts and how you deal with that. Go to the next one. Thanks, Phil. In terms of preparing for the exam, what I can say is every advisor is different. Your knowledge is different, your comfort in undertaking exams, your time commitments are different. So please consider what it is for you that you're required to do and prepare yourself accordingly. Set a realistic time frame, set realistic goals in preparing for the exam so it doesn't create an anxiety for you. If you plan it out, it helps you with the preparation. The type of the exam to expect. This exam is about applying your knowledge. It's not about memorising the Corps Act or the Privacy Act or the other acts. It's really about how you apply all of that to client scenarios. It's not a technical exam. So it's about how you apply. So we will have advice scenarios that might appear technical, but it is more about how the regulatory requirements, the ethical obligations are applying to each of those scenarios. So really encourage you not to get thrown, and I know a number of advisors get thrown when they see a scenario that is not based on their advice discipline. So, I'm a stockbroker or I'm insurance only advisor and the question's not insurance advice. I get thrown. The question is not about the specific insurance strategy. It's about how you apply the regulatory requirements. So for example, when do you provide advice documentation? That doesn't matter. The advice specialisation doesn't matter as to when you're required by law to provide advice documentation, as an example. The types of questions that you should expect, there are multiple choice questions or A, B, C, D questions. There are complex multiple choice questions, which are true, false questions, and you'll need to answer both questions to get a full mark, and considered response or short answer questions, so you'll need to write a response. And we'll move to the next one, Phil, sorry. So some really do's and don'ts based on our experience that we've seen across all the exams, but also some experience that our markers have sort of highlighted to us that I thought would be important to share. Read the question carefully and how it's being discussed. I cannot stress this enough in terms of do not try and answer a different question because you're just you're thinking through the question too much. Read the question, look for keywords. It will ask you, there'll be words in bold, there'll be list, discuss, explain. If it says list two things. If it says discuss or explain, put more emphasis in your explanation. If it provides keywords like the most important or the likely impact, look for keywords in the questions and really focus on that. Answer all questions and manage your time accordingly. Just really be conscious of that. We do know that the length of the exam has not been an issue in terms of the data that we've got. Majority of people finish it well within the time frame and have time to review. Understand the differences between consequences and action. One of the things that our markers have said is that when people read the question, they don't necessarily look at the keywords and answer the question. So for example, if a question is asking about what are the consequences of X, Y, Z, some people are responding with the actual action that they would take rather than what the consequence is. So really be careful in terms of the questions and the words. Stick with the question that's in front of you. Again, can't stress that enough, and know what a dilemma means. We get a lot of confusion around that, so really understand what dilemma is. Don't assume that you, whatever you've done normally, and this sort of goes to your license, what your licensee asks you to do, really understand what the law requires of you, what's the definition of key things like personal, general, factual information. Don't leave blank responses. Sorry, excuse me. And don't start with the answer and work backwards, because you'll actually bring information into the scenario that's not there if you're doing it that way. So really try not to do that. Overthinking the question. So what we find is some people have said to us, oh, well, I knew the answer, but I thought that you were trying to trick me because it was too obvious. So please don't overthink the question. If it's obvious, then absolutely the answer's there. There's nothing in the exam to try and trick anybody. And don't need to copy and paste from the open book material. The open book material is there for as a guide. You aren't expected to memorize things out of the open book material, so there's no need for you to copy and paste straight out of that into. It's about how the content of that applies to the scenario. So always answer the question, especially in the written questions, based on the scenario. So refer your answer back to the scenario rather than, you know, and extract from the Corporations Act, for example. So thank you for listening. Hopefully that's provided you some very quick tips in terms of how to prepare for the exam, and wish you all the very best for your next sitting. Thank you very much, Phil.
Thank you, Amelia. Some absolutely fantastic tips there, and we really appreciate you being part of this webinar. Next, we're going to pass over to Kaplan Professional. Brian Knight, who we all know very well, is the CEO of Kaplan Professional. He's been part of Kaplan for a long time and very close to the advice sector and the profession. He's also going to be joined by Kathy Kavanagh, who is Senior Manager Technical Advice. So over to you, Brian and Kathy.
Thank you, Phil. Kathy, you're there. Welcome. It's a pleasure to be here on this panel and to be joined by so many others who are all trying to share a common goal of trying to help as many advisors as we can through this exam and then subsequently through their education journey. In terms of the exam, from Kaplan's point of view, we've tried to provide an extensive range of solutions. As an approved higher education provider, we needed to make sure that everything we do is educationally sound and signed off by our academics. We built everything we do with the industry, and we're delighted with the support they give us. So from our exam, there were 5 elements that we wanted from our exam support. There are 5 elements that we've tried to offer. One is a practice exam. We'll come back to that, Phil. Kathy will talk through those, but in terms of our offering, we have what we call CAPE, which is a practice exam. We've tried to mirror the FASEA exam in terms of length, numbers of questions, time frame, and there are 3 versions of that. There is no charge to be done for that. We have a bank of questions in OnTrack that are meant to be practice questions. We have monthly free exam webinar presentations that Kathy oversees. There are normally hundreds of people joining those. We build corporate workshops and tailored programs for people who want support. And then there is individual tutoring available for an advisor who might want to get one-on-one support. So it's a pleasure for me really to be able to introduce Kathy. Kathy has built the CAPE exams, overseen the build of those, and runs everything that's involved in exam prep for Kaplan, and she'll take you through our thoughts and support that we can give you.
Thanks very much, Brian. Phil, can we just go to the next slide? So just to reinforce what Brian was saying, we have a wide range of resources that we've created specifically to support advisors to successfully pass the FASEA exam. The CAPE preparation room, we call it the CAPE Advisor Preparation Exam, but it actually consists of 2 resources. One is a preparation room. So this is like a subject room where advisors can go to look at the curated resources that we've developed, and they're based on the resources in the FASEA reading list. So they're based on the learning objectives in the curriculum. Advisors can do the CAPE exam, which mirrors the online proctored format and duration and structure of the FASEA exam. So they're able to do 3 versions of the CAPE exam if they wish. And as Brian said, you know, there's no cost to advisors to do that. And what it does is, to pick up on Amelia's point, is it tests the learning objectives and the 3 knowledge areas that she talked about just before the FASEA exam. Importantly, it's online and it's self-paced. So it gives really good practical experience of what it's like to sit an exam of that length and duration and complexity. We believe that our practice exam is authentic and comprehensive and true to the objectives that it needs to meet. Now, when somebody sits the CAPE exam, they'll receive specific assessor feedback within 5 business days. So even for the multiple choice questions, when you do the CAPE exam, you're actually able to check your own answers, which is really important. So it'll tell you, you know, if you didn't get the answer right, what is the correct answer? And with the short answer responses that you attempt, you'll also get specific feedback on how you performed. And again, we've looked at the practice questions and answers that have been provided by FASEA, so we've aligned them with those. The questions have been developed by leading faculty and they're all reviewed regularly to ensure that they're academically valid and they're set at the right AQF level. And as Brian said, since the introduction of CAPE, which was last year, we have had close to 6,000 advisors sit the exam. And as you can see from that number, some of them have sat it more than once. And to date, the average pass rate for CAPE, for our version of the practice exam, is 70%. And that's generally been a little bit lower than FASEA's average pass rate, but we're proud of that because we believe that it does provide advisors with a really sound opportunity to prepare for the rigorous FASEA exam. We also have available on-track Q banks, which are multiple choice questions based on 2 of the FASEA knowledge areas. They can be sat at any time by, by an advisor, and the questions are randomised. So it's a good way again to practice questions. We also offer one-on-one coaching and consultation and coaching with experienced industry practitioners, and quite a few of them have actually sat the FASEA exam themselves, so they understand the experience. There is a cost for that, for the practitioner, for their time only. Corporate sessions can be offered face-to-face or online and catered to licensee groups. They're scalable, we offer them at cost, and they can be tailored to different audience types and requirements. And Brian has mentioned the FASEA exam preparation webinar, which we run monthly. And that basically provides an insight into what's required on the FASEA exam. We reinforce the importance of making sure that advisors have understood what they need to know about the exam, and reinforce how important it is to go to the FASEA website to look at the resources that Amelia was talking about. So we reinforce that. We also talk about the resources we can provide and also exam tips. So again, we interact with a lot of advisors who have passed or not passed the exam, and so that informs us as well on tips that we can pass on as well. We have over 100 registrations each month, and in fact that number has been increasing each month as we go through this year. If I can just get you to go to the next slide, Phil, that would be great. So some insights and tips perhaps from us. I'd have to say at the start that many advisors are still very unsure about just getting started with the whole exam process. And in particular, the feedback that we are receiving is they're not sure what the exam tests, which is obviously in the 3 knowledge areas, and the structure of the exam. So a lot of questions around that. Interestingly, there's a lot of questions also still about what resources are available to them and where to find them. And particularly Amelia was talking about the Foseer resources. The candidate video in particular is one that we reinforce all the time. We often get questions around what's it like, what am I allowed to bring in, you know, what will happen on the day, what happens if it's a proctored exam, what if it's, you know, face-to-face. So again, we reinforce how important it is to watch the candidate video and make sure that they're clear on what they can and can't bring in, because the worst thing in the world is to go into an exam thinking that, you know, you're allowed to bring certain things in, or that this will be the experience, and then to find out that it's different from what you expected. What happens in the exam, as I said, is very important. There is a lot of confusion, I have to say, about the suggested reading list. And I can tell you that at every webinar that I've been at, I'm always being asked, how do I go about studying the whole Corporations Act? So it's really important for advisors to be clear on the parameters, because it's not everything. Again, looking at the learning objectives for each of the knowledge areas in the FASEA exam is important, because as Amelia said, there's going to be questions attached to those learning objectives. Now, many advisors have anxiety about being able to undertake the exam, and it may have been that it's a long time since they took such a long exam, or it could be the high stakes nature of the exam. They may be lacking in experience about time management in an exam, and also specific techniques in answering multiple choice and short answer questions. Now, the stakes are even higher, obviously, for advisors who are resitting, and obviously they're more anxious about it. Now, during one-on-one coaching sessions that we've experienced, it is often the case that the advisors express embarrassment about failing in front of their family, their colleagues, and their clients. And they really fear failing again and losing their professional standing and their livelihood and their financial impact to their families. So in the coaching sessions, we spend a lot of time helping advisors to regain confidence in themselves and to really start to focus on what can help them to improve their performance next time. So one of the things I always recommend is if you have sat the exam previously, think about what the experience was. Try and recall what it was, even if it's probably not something that you want to do, but think about the experience and how you went, how you felt about it. So where you felt confident, where you didn't. And write that down, because that's going to help you to focus on where you should be focusing, rather than trying to go back and redo everything or revisit everything. Now, some advisors like to learn in a group environment, and we do provide workshops, but for others, especially those who need to resit, once they understand what they need to study, we often find that they prefer to study at their own pace or to take up the individual coaching, which we also support. So a couple of final tips from us is just to really make sure you're clear on the exam format and the content areas. Understand the resources list that's available to you, but also in addition to that, we in our CAPE preparation room, we also include a lot of the regulatory guides, a lot of the guides and materials that are provided by the other regulators that are involved in the other legislation, for example. So we aim to try and break that down into more manageable concepts. So the regulatory guides are great because they help to interpret the legislation to make more sense of it, and often they have worked examples, which is easier to understand. Do as many practice questions as you're able to do to build up your knowledge of the types of questions that you could be asked, and also how they're expected to be answered. And make a note of the types of questions that you answer the most easily and how much time it takes you, because this will feed into your time plan for the exam. Check off the areas you're doing well in, and then focus really on the areas that need the most attention. And go into the exam with a plan. So allocate specific time for questions and ensure that you leave a bit of time at the end to check your work. As has been said by Amelia, really read the questions and the answers carefully. So make sure that you're answering the question that you're actually being asked and not the one that you would like to be asked. And in the exam, prioritise the questions that you're really confident about and try and do those first, but maximise your marks by trying to attempt all of the questions. And in the lead up to the exam, think about self-care. So prepare yourself mentally and physically, eat well, stay hydrated, and have lots of sleep, because sleep actually helps you to consolidate memory. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you, Kathy. I really appreciate what you've taken everyone through, and particularly the mention of how advisors might feel if they have failed the exam and the impact that it has on them, and how to recover from that. So our next speaker is David Glenn, who's the National Technical Manager at TAL, and I think it's appropriate for us to recognise that TAL has really stood up through the TAL Risk Academy to help advisors with the exam. So over to you, David. Thank you.
Thank you, Phil, and good afternoon, everybody. And thank you for this opportunity of just sharing with you some of the tips and traps that we've seen in terms of this exam. Just by way of introduction, TAL as a product provider has made a decision some months ago to provide comprehensive and extensive support to advisors through the exam process. And I hasten to add, as a product provider, we are not in direct competition with any of the professional education providers. We are an insurance company, and that is our core business. We see the support we give as a supplement to the services that are offered by the professional education providers in this space. Now, what we've done is we have compiled a masterclass, and that masterclass has been extremely popular for advisors. We've run over 200 masterclasses over the past couple of years, and we've had 6,500 attendees through our masterclasses. So it's a substantial percentage of the advisor cohort that has been through the TAL masterclass. The masterclass does provide study material, and the important part about the study material is I emphasize to exam candidates that this is the starting off point. Our workbooks are the foundation, if you like. The reading list is quite overwhelming. So start off with something digestible, and we suggest these workbooks are a good starting off point. The masterclass is available on demand as well. We're finding on-demand learning now growing in popularity. About 10% of our attendees prefer to do these sessions on demand. COVID, of course, has thrown us, as it has thrown a lot of organizations into virtual mode, and we developed virtual capacity within 6 months of the lockdown happening in March 2020. We charge people a nominal $55 to attend the masterclass, but we donate all those proceeds to charity, and some 200,000 has been donated to charity. So that's our first pillar of support, if you like. The masterclass has a follow-up set of questions. It's always good to practice questions, and that's a very important part of completing the masterclass. What we also offer via the TAL Risk Academy is what we call an exam intensive, and we've run some 50 exam intensive sessions. They're a mixture of virtual and face-to-face sessions, and basically what these sessions do is share exam intelligence and problem areas. We also offer one-on-one support on specific issues through our Ask an Expert service there. And what we do in that particular area, anybody who approaches Ask an Expert does get a written answer to their particular queries. A lot of exam candidates, particularly as the exam date looms, use this service extensively just to clarify certain issues that are creating confusion shortly before the exam. Let's have the next slide. So what have we encountered as being the essential preparation tips? Now, a lot has been said that you don't have to learn things off by heart, and I heartily endorse that. But I think what you do need to do is embed some fundamental issues and some fundamental principles in the mind. And that will stand you in good stead when you're under exam pressure to actually recall those particular issues. So best interest fundamentals, that needs to be really in the mind. Don't rely on the exam material. You'll have to plow through tracts of corporations law to locate that. That's not a good use of exam time. Safe harbor steps, code values, code standards, those need to be embedded in the mind so that you can recall those fundamental requirements very quickly and efficiently, and then apply those requirements in order to answer the exam questions. Now, there are at present 107 practice questions that FASEA have put together. I urge everybody to go through each of those 107 questions with diligence, with thoroughness, and not only concentrate on the right answers. FASEA very helpfully give you the wrong answers as well, together with the reasoning why the answers are wrong. And I think that's an important part of the learning process, is to understand why those answers are wrong. The latest iteration of the FASEA questions examines key areas such as the values, time-critical SOAs, and also the questions have been modified in order to deal with the new rules in relation to fee disclosure statements. And I urge everybody to familiarize themselves with those rules before they sit the exam. In terms of the code of ethics, I think the best technique to use here is to build up in your mind a case study bank. And the reason for that is that hopefully when you've got a scenario posed in the exam, you've already considered that, and that scenario is in your bank. You've got immediate recall, and you can answer that question quickly and efficiently. And the FASEA guides in relation to the code of ethics are very important. They quote a number of examples. In the area of regulatory guides, those are critical, and I endorse the view that is expressed by Kaplan in regard to regulatory guides. Regulatory guides are far easier to read than slabs of corporation law. So I urge everybody to study the regulatory guides in detail, particularly the examples. The regulatory guides are very useful because they provide examples. Control F needs to be your friend. And the reason why I say Control F needs to be your friend is because that's the device that you're going to use to locate critical sections in legislation. But bear in mind, it's a somewhat eccentric search tool. So practice searching your way through critical sections of the Privacy Act, the anti-money laundering legislation using Control F. You don't want to be using Control F for the first time when you sit this particular exam. A very good learning technique that I've found, certainly from the times I've sat exams and talking to advisors, is that when you are revising and reading a particular section, take notes. The taking of notes helps to engrave the principles in the mind, and that is very, very important. And what you do with your notes is when you go to the next section of your study plan, before you embark on that next section, you refresh your memory as to what was covered in the previous section, and your notes play a critical part in the whole memory refreshment process. So those are the preparation tips that I recommend. And what I'm now going to take you through is what I think needs to happen, or what you need to think about on the day of the exam itself. Now, the first point is that you may well be subjected to the exam police. So as you go in, it's not a thrilling experience speaking to previous candidates. That's just the nature of the beast. So what you need to do is you need to be prepared for that environment, for that atmosphere, and you must not let that atmosphere put you off your game. Secondly, I can only emphasize what has been emphasized at this point. Read the questions carefully, establish the requirements of the examiner. That is very important. You need to put yourself in the shoes of the examiner and say, what does the examiner want to see in front of me to give a mark to the particular candidate? If you approach the question through that perspective, you've got a much better chance of putting the answer that the examiner wants, and hopefully you'll get your marks. Importantly, you are in an exam situation. That's an artificial environment. It's not a real world environment. So many advisors try to apply a real world environment, how they would tackle this particular problem that's before them in the real world. That's not the technique that you use here. What you use here is a technique of a reading very carefully of the facts, and then you only apply the facts that are given to you. So you do not embellish in any way what has been given as part of the exam facts. Often the answers are in the questions themselves. So very often they talk about a particular client's aims and they say, well, what do you need to do to give appropriate advice in this situation? The answer to that is actually very simple. You've got to give advice that meets the aims of the client. And very often the aims of the client are expressly stated in the words of the question. So this gets back to the point made initially that you've got to read these questions very carefully. Now, sadly, what happens with exam questions with the best will in the world on the part of FASEA, you might get a question that is somewhat ambivalent, somewhat ambiguous. Now, what you need to do when you get confronted with that kind of question is answer the question to the best of your ability. Don't let this kind of question taint your thinking in any way and put you off your performance in regard to other questions. What you need to do is answer the question to the best of your ability and then move on. Importantly, answer all questions. There are no negative marks. So it is vitally important that you answer all questions. So you have to pace yourself. And the feedback is that the exam time-wise is doable. Most candidates will complete the exam within the requisite time, but you need to spread your efforts across that exam time. It roughly works out at a mark for every 3 minutes. So if you've got a 2-mark question and you're spending 15 minutes on the question, you are spending too much time on that particular question. The law of diminishing returns will operate. The law of diminishing returns basically says you're going to get your marks that you're going to get within the first 6 months. Within the first 6 minutes of doing the question. So when you are dealing with the written questions, you must avoid giving too much detail because that's not an efficient use of your time. But you must give sufficient detail in order to show the examiner that you understand the point that you are making. So, for example, clipped statements such as estate planning or tax planning are not going to get you marks. What you need to do is you need to elaborate what you mean by estate planning, what you mean by tax advantages, so the examiner can understand the point that is being made and hopefully can give you a mark for making that particular point. Those are the tips for the big day. I wish everyone good fortune on the big day. Hopefully not good luck, but good fortune in the sense that hopefully you're working off a thorough foundation of preparation. Over to you, Phil.
Well, thank you very much, David, and really appreciate those tips there. We've had over 300 participants in the webinar today and 39 questions. We're not going to have enough time to do all of those questions. We have one more presenter still to come. And after that, we will then, we will probably run over time, but we'll try and fit in a few key questions. Our next presenter is Conrad Gilbert from the Knowledge Shop. He's the Professionalism and Ethics Advisor at the Knowledge Shop. He has been doing this for quite a long time and has some tremendous insight. So over to you, Conrad. Thank you.
Thanks, Phil. Thanks for inviting us to present today. And I'm just mindful of time too, because those questions are important. So a lot of the tips that I'm going to cover off have already been covered off. So where I can, I'll move through quickly so I can get to those questions, because I think a lot of advisors listening today want to get those questions off there and get some answers. So let me just, can I just go to the next slide, please? So firstly, I have actually sat the exam. So I know what you're going through or about to go through. So in some ways I get that. I am still an advisor. I don't practice. I stopped practicing a couple of years ago, but it does give me some insight, particularly when I sit the exam and I put it all on the line, because if I had failed, I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing right now. So let me just go to the next slide and just quickly explain who Knowledge Shop is. And maybe I would assume a significant number of you don't know who Knowledge Shop is. Knowledge Shop is a company that came out of the accounting profession about 20 years ago when GST first entered the market. A lot of accountants were confused, so Knowledge Shop was formed, and it's grown significantly since then. So in the accounting space, so the TBD that's provided there, Knowledge Shop represents over 20% of that market share in terms of what they provide. So if you went into our website, you'd see a lot of accounting CBD, but a lot of accounting CBD that also applies in wealth. So I've been brought on board now on the wealth side as we expand our services out into the wealth market. So FASEA is obviously the first place for us to start, and we'll start working our way through. So we started presenting this exam preparation series back in March last year. Since then, we've had over 2,000 advisors have been through our various programs. So, and the types of people that are professionals that come through have been full advisors. We've got limited advisors, we've had accountants, stockbrokers, risk advisors, etc. What we offer is a range of options. So we have of the face-to-face webinars that we do in each capital city in some of the regions. They're run before each FASEA exam series, and as long as the borders aren't up, we're out there doing that. We went to a web-based version of that early last year when everything got locked down, and we then mimicked what we were doing in the face-to-face environment. So the face-to-face workshop goes for 8 hours. The webinar series we've broken up into 3 distinct modules, and that goes for 2.5 to 3 hours for each one. And we also have what we call an on-cue, which is an on-demand series, which replicates those 2 options, but it's me effectively being filmed and going through those, the 3 modules. And we do some bespoke stuff for AFSLs who want something specific. So for example, we've been working with a stockbroking firm and designed something for them. And everything that we do, we follow up on. So once we present the face-to-face or the webinars, or it could be even the IQ session or the on-demand where you can listen to it at your leisure, we're there right up until the exam. You can contact us. We'll do one-on-one training with you and assist you. So that's kind of how we operate. So what I might do is I'll just go to the next slide and give you a bit of a feel in some of the things that we've discovered as part of that process. I think importantly, or what I'm really doing in some of these slides, is I'm really summarising some of the really good points that were raised before from the previous speakers. What we tend to find, particularly lately, we're getting a number of advisors who've failed the exam. So they're coming to our sessions, and often what they tell us is that they realise they didn't prepare properly. So they made an assumption. So often we'll get some feedback from someone who says, well, I just took the exam to see how it'd go. Turned out I didn't go too well, and then still didn't prepare well. And now it's at that final point where they need to do the preparation. And it's that inadequate preparation that can cause the problem, because whilst if you've been an advisor for a number of years, you know what you need to do. I mean, you can look at an advice document from a paraplanner and go, well, yeah, that's correct or it's not. But the reality of it is you may not have thought about where that sits in the actual Corporations Act, because you didn't need to. So that's the challenge, to actually find out where those things are. But you've got so much information out there, as was alluded to before, particularly in the curriculum. What we've done is we've distilled everything that's on the FASEA in the FASEA curriculum and summarised that into a detailed workbook. And in that workbook, it effectively follows the face-to-face and the webinars that we do, where we start off with ethics. So we start there deliberately because we want to establish what is ethics, what are the standards, how do they work. Then we move into the advice construction. So we actually do advice construction second. And the reason we do that is just to do a session on regulation isn't going to help. What you need to do is actually be able to dovetail the steps in regulation into the advice process. So how it all works from engagement through the 6 steps all the way through. And while you're doing that, and as you're overlaying the actual regulatory piece, so you're talking about 7.7, which deals with disclosure documentation, or 7.7a, which is dealing with best interest duty and the FOPA requirements. You can see where it fits and how it applies, but we can also overlay the differences with the Code of Ethics as we're doing that. So by the time we get to the end of that second module, we've sort of got 70% of the exam sorted. And then in the final session, we finalise it by just summarising the regulation, because it all's linked in and we've covered it. And then we'll go through anti-money laundering, counter-terrorism. We focus on the Privacy Act, because there's always questions on those, and the TASA legislation. Now, all the way through, what we do is we stop as we go, because we know you learn better when you stop, when you've covered something. We have some check-in questions, and or we'll round out specific sections with some actual practice questions that we hope kind of try to replicate what you'll experience in the exam. So multiple choice, true and false. We also provide all the answers afterwards, and how I got the answers. So it literally show you the sections, etc., so you can get used to finding it. So it's that inadequate preparation can often be the issue. I might go to the next slide. The other thing we do find is that limited advisors, so people who are really specialising in a particular area, do struggle with scenario-based questions. And I think, as Amelia was saying before, the questions aren't technical, and sometimes people get thrown when they read something, and in their mind subconsciously they're going, well, I don't know anything about that particular part of the advice. I remember thinking about it years ago when I got the qualifications, but I haven't dealt in that. And then that it's a self-fulfilling prophecy, and not focusing on the actual question. What are they really asking? Is it about ethics? Is it about thoughts? Is it about the documentation that's required, etc.? Might go to the next one. So putting the exam, it was talked about before, time management's the key. The number of advisors that I've spoken to who have not passed, it was often not their ability, not their knowledge, it was time management. So, you know, when you think about it, you've got so many questions, you can work out how much time you've got for each question. The advice I always give to people is because of the way the exam's structured, it allows you to, once you've done your perusal, it allows you to do every question you know. So you go through the first question, it's multiple choice, you know the answer, you click commit, keep going. Now, the beauty of doing that is if you answer every question you know, don't dwell on a question you don't know or you have to look it up, because that'll rob you of time. And the more times you go beyond that extra couple of minutes or 1 minute more on a question, given the time frame, you've lost time. So if you're spending time answering questions quickly, take you a minute to answer, you've banked a minute. Over time, you start to bank up 10, 15, 20, 25 minutes. And if you get to the end and you've got some questions you're not sure about, you've got that extra time. If you do what I've heard advisors say to me, you get that angry sometimes and stressed, and you just want to find the answer in your control F and you're looking everywhere for it, you've just lost time and you've just made it worse. So you've got to be really careful. I think the other point about ambiguity, I think the way I look at ambiguity, and having sat the exam myself, you've only got, they're trying to present a case study to you. Now, if you think about your own clients, if you try to present a case study about your clients, you'd have 2 pages. So you've really only got a paragraph or 2 and they're trying to explain something as a case. So the mistake you can make is unconsciously fill in the gaps. Particularly experienced advisors, you'll fill in the gaps and then you provide the wrong answer. So really important there. Short answer questions, another area that we find advisors are struggling with. How to answer short answer questions. So the way we focus on that is to look at it's a bit of a 3-step process. The what, what's being asked, why. So explain, if you like, your view on the why, and then link it back to the question, but link it to the question, not to something you're thinking it's about when it's not. Really important. And stress management. Look, it's easy to say, try and stay calm, but in an exam, we're all humans, so you will be stressed. So it's about just trying to do all the things you know first, and if you can get to the end and you've banked a bit of time, you can help with that stress that you've been going through. Might go to the next slide if it's okay, Phil. Now, practice questions. I can't emphasise enough how important it is to do as many practice questions as you can. So we say to advisors, if you can get access to the Kaplan practice exams, do them. We've got practice exams. Any practice exams you can get, the better. The Foseer practice exams, I've been using that lately for advisors who failed. So they send me their feedback, and on the back it tells you where the issues are. And Foseer now, you can map it to the actual subdomains that you need to answer, and I've mapped those subdomains to the actual questions that Foseer have, and I can quickly work out from that where the issues are. So I was dealing with someone just the other day, not an issue with multiple choice and true and false questions, know the content, the issue was short answer questions. Absolutely clear that was the problem and in the area, so we can focus on that as she leads into the exam next week. So practice exams are great, but sometimes the problem with that is it doesn't necessarily teach you what you don't know. So we have had some feedback from advisors, that's all they did. They didn't do any other preparation, did the practice exams. Now the reality of it is they may have flipped a couple of answers, thought they were cool, did the exam, came out and it didn't work out the way they wanted. I'll go to the next slide. All right, so I'll just finish that off. Hopefully I've banked a bit of time there so you can get all those questions. So what I would say is you need to focus on the knowledge to path. So we've distilled it all down. We put Q&A all the way through. We provide all the answers. We've got the guides that you need and summarised it for you, and how to apply that theory, and we can tailor our workshops. So we've got face-to-face, we've got webinars, we've got what we call on-demand, so you can watch me present the whole thing, as well as some bespoke stuff. And if you do our courses, the commitment is after the course is done, you will do one-on-one right up until you sit the exam. That's me. Thanks again.
Fantastic. Thank you, Conrad. Some more excellent content there, and an experience from someone who has sat the exam and helped many people to get through it. We are over time. I hope that everyone has found this useful. I will now quickly go to Kaz Garrard for maybe the top 3 or 4 questions, which we'll quickly deal with if some of the presenters are still online and available to answer the questions. So over to you, Kaz.
Yeah, well, firstly, we've had a lot of questions about some of the content and the resources that have been spoken about in today's webinar. We will email all participants with links to all of those resources on the FASEA website, Kaplan website, the TAL Masterclass, and the Knowledge Shop. We've had quite a few questions regarding the Sydney lockdown that we are currently experiencing due to COVID, and we have the FASEA exam commencing next week. So the questions are really directed to Amelia at FASEA, just to ask, do you know at this stage what the process will be for those people who are in lockdown? and those that have already booked for face-to-face exams, and what will happen with the remote proctoring.
Great, thanks, Kaz. And I'm sure many questions, but given the breaking news today regarding the extension, I've been working with our exam administrator this morning and will continue to do so after this session today to work through what exactly the options are for those advisors that are impacted. Please make sure you stay close to your email as you will be emailed with a number of options, hopefully by tomorrow or Friday at the very latest. So we are on top of the situation, trying to get as much advice as we can from the health experts in terms of what will be available, what we can and can't do, and we will communicate it as soon as possible.
Okay, thanks. We've had quite a few questions. So there was some changes to the fee disclosure requirements that commenced on 1st of July. A lot of the questions are concerns around, will there be any questions around this in the exam? And if so, do people answer under assuming old rules, or do they answer under new rules? Is there any guidance there?
I'll take that one again, I guess. So I can't tell you whether there are any questions in the exam related to that, but what I can say, given it is a requirement that you are complying with that requirement from 1 July this year, that if there are questions in the exam, we would be expecting you to answer with the new requirements, because they are actually in force right now. I can say that I'd encourage you to go to the preparation guide, because we did update that to include the latest legislative instruments that are related to those requirements. And those instruments will also be part of the open book material, because they are statutory requirements.
Okay, thank you. Well, that covered off one of the other questions about open book material as well.
I think there was one about whether there's reg guides or in the open book material. So the FASEA exam does not include reg guides in the open book material. It only includes the statutory legislative instruments for each of the key requirements. But we do encourage you to use the reg guides as part of your preparation.
Thank you. And I think maybe the last question might be around behavioural biases. There seems to be some confusion where people are not really sure what they're being tested on and what is meant to be tested. Are you able to shed any light on behavioural areas?
Yeah, so I encourage you, there is a very good material a link to some material, free material in the reading list it's called Behavioural Investors or something like that. I encourage you to have a look at that. It's a very good guide, and it will definitely help you. But the other thing is, there are definitely some behavioural bias questions in the practice set of questions. So we've made sure that we've included that. A little tip is that a number of those questions are retired exam questions. So they're very true to questions that were in the actual exam.
Well, thank you, Kaz. Thank you for covering off those questions. We are now well over time. So I will now look to wrap this up. I certainly want to thank all of our presenters. It was fantastic to have Amelia from FASEA, Brian and Kathy from Kaplan, David from the Tail Risk Academy, and Conrad from the Knowledge Shop. Fantastic insights today and tips for everyone to take on board. This webinar will be recorded. A copy of the slides will be available, and the CPD will also be available. What I'd like to do is once again thank all of our presenters and thank everyone for joining us on the webinar today. Thank you very much, and good fortune when you next sit the FASEA exam. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.